What's up everybody and welcome to a new video. And in this video we continue to go over my notes for the debugger. And this time we're going to cover the launch configurations. So here the first note is about the prerequisite. Namely, you need to open a workspace if you want to use launch configurations. And then the next point is about the purpose of launch configurations. Namely, what they enable you to do is to configure and save debugging setup details. So for example, specifying the application entry point, attaching to a running application, setting environment variables, or it is also not necessary anymore to manually specify the debugger when debugging a new file, or to manually specify the debug configuration when opening or reopening a workspace. And to show you what I mean by this note here, I have prepared this folder here. So let's open that in a new VS Code instance. And let's make this here a little bit smaller so that we can see this node here. And then let's open now this folder, so debugger. And here let's open this first file. And here let's add a breakpoint and then start debugging. So if I now click here, run debug, then we first have to select the debugger, because we are debugging a new file, so we haven't been debugging this file before. So let's select the debugger, and then we have select a debug configuration because we haven't been debugging in this opened workspace before. We just opened it. So let's select that. Now the debugger is starting. So then in the meantime, let me open here the second file. And then let's go back to the first. And then let's wait for the debugger to start. And here now let's stop this again. And then now let's debug this file here again. And this time we don't have to specify anything. So we don't have to specify debugger because we were already debugging this file before. And we also don't have to specify a debug configuration because we were debugging already in this opened workspace here. However, if I now go to the second file and add a breakpoint, here if I want to debug, I again have to select a debugger, because this is a new file and we haven't been debugging this before. So if I run this, and then let's stop this here again, and now let's close this workspace, and then let's reopen it again. So desktop debugger. And now if I go to the first file here, and if I want to debug this again, then I have again have to specify the debug configuration, because we just opened this workspace and haven't been debugging in this open workspace yet. However, I don't have to specify a debugger because we were already debugging this file here before. And now let's wait for the debugger to start. And then let's stop this again. And then let's go to the second file again. And here if I click run and debug, I don't have to specify anything, because so I don't have to specify debugger because we were already debugging this file before. And I also don't have to specify a debug configuration because we were debugging in this opened workspace before. Okay, so this is what I mean by this note here, that you always have to specify the debugger and the debug configuration. And this can get somewhat annoying. So to get around this, you can create launch configurations, and there are two types. There are automatic launch configurations and manual or customized launch configurations. So let's first look at automatic, and let's first look at how to create them. Therefore, let's open this other workspace here, and here in the sidebar you have this button show automatic Python configurations. So if you click that, then you get here a drop-down list with different configurations. So let's select here the first one. And then the debugger starts debugging. And now if I stop that, then you can see here a change in the sidebar, namely those views here, they stay visible, and that blue run and debug button isn't shown anymore. So now if you want to start the debugger, you have to use this green play button. Okay, so now let's open here a new file, and let's add a breakpoint, and now let's debug that. And namely, before, without those automatic Python automatic launch configurations, you had to specify debugger when you debug a new file. However, now that we have those configurations, we don't have to do that anymore, and therefore let's simply click this play button, and you can see we don't have to specify a debugger. Okay, so let's stop it again, and then let's close this folder here, and then let's reopen it. Desktop debugger, and let's go to debugger. And normally when you reopen a workspace, then you have to specify the debug configuration. And here, now that we have those automatic Python configurations, we don't have to do that anymore. So here now, by the way, if you reopen a workspace, then you see this run and debug button again. So now if I click that, then you can see we don't have to specify a debug configuration. So this is now how you can create automatic launch configurations. Okay, so now let's go over these side notes here. And the first one we've already covered, namely this is about the changes in the sidebar, that the different views stay visible, and that you need to click the screen play button to start the debugger. So then let's get to the second one, which is about creating multiple configurations. And to show that, how that works, I've prepared here a JavaScript file. So let's copy this simply into here. Let's add here a breakpoint. And now if I try to debug this, then we get an error, obviously, because we can't debug a JavaScript file with a Python debugger. So therefore now let's create another automatic launch configuration for this file. Therefore you simply click the drop down arrow here, and here you can then create a new automatic launch configuration. So for Node.js or for Python debugger, this add configuration option here is actually for creating manual or customized launch configurations. So let's then click Node.js, and here then you can have a list of different options. So let's use run current file. So now let's start debugging, and if I now start debugging, we can debug here this JavaScript file. And now if you want to again go back to debugging a Python file, then simply select the respective configuration from this drop-down list here. So now if I want to debug this, then we can again debug our Python file. Okay, so this is how you can create multiple configurations. So then the last side note is about deleting configurations. Namely, you can't really delete those configurations again. However, I found a workaround, and to show you that, let's close this folder here. And then here, what you can do is simply copy this folder. So here's the copy, and then delete the original folder, and then rename that copied folder and give it the name of the original folder again. So now let's open this in this other workspace. So here, if I open the debugger, and then here open this file, let's add a breakpoint. And then now if we start debugging, then we again have to specify a debugger and then a debug configuration. And then let's wait for the debugger to start. And then here in the sidebar, you will also see a change. Namely, here in this drop-down list, it says again, no configurations. And if I stop the debugger, then we see here this run and debug button again. Okay, so those are the side notes. And with that now, we've covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to automatic launch configurations. Okay, so now let's get to the manual or customized launch configurations. And here there are two types. There are workspace-specific and user-specific. So let's first look at the workspace-specific and how to create them. Therefore, let's go to the other workspace. Namely, here on the sidebar, you have this link where you can create a launch.json file. So if you click that, then you have to select the debugger and then the debug configuration. And this then creates this launch.json file. So now let me actually make this window here again bigger so that we can see it better. So this is what this launch.json file looks like. And here are then some default attributes, and you can change those attributes. For example, if I change here the name to my config, then this will be depicted here in this drop-down list as my config. Okay, so this is how you can create a workspace-specific manual launch configuration. So now let's get here to the second point, where I have lists of available attributes for customizing. So I have a general list and a Python specific list. So let's look at those links here. So the first one is the general list. So here are those attributes. So for example, type, request, name, presentation, pre-launch, and so on. And then the Python specific list includes, for example, name, type, request, program, module, and so on. Okay, so these are these lists, and here there's also a side note, namely the available attributes can also be accessed via IntelliSense. So if I go back to this other workspace here, so here now let's add another attribute. So therefore let's go to a new line, and then if I invoke IntelliSense with control space, then here you can see the list of available attributes. So let's, for example, search for just my code. And here we can set it to true, or we can set it to false. Okay, so this is how you can use IntelliSense to access those attributes. And with that, now we've covered all the main points that I want to cover with respect to workspace-specific launch configurations. Okay, so now let's go over these side notes here. And the first one is that the launch.json file is saved into this .vs Code folder. So to show you that, let's go back to the other workspace. And here in the Explorer, you can see that this .vs Code folder was created, and here is the launch.json file located. Okay, so then the second side note is about creating multiple configurations. So that you can do in 3 different ways. So you can click here this Add Configuration button within the launch.json file. Or if you go here to Debugger and this drop-down list, here you can also add a configuration, or you can also use again IntelliSense. So therefore here, let's simply add a comma and then go to the next line, and then invoke IntelliSense with control space. And then here you can select different debuggers. So let's select here Python, and then you have to select the debug configuration. So let's this time take Python 5 with arguments. And now we have created a new configuration. And you can access that via this drop-down list next to this play button here. So here is this new configuration. So this is how you can create multiple configurations. And now the last side note is about deleting configurations. And this can be easily done by deleting this respective configuration in this launcher.json file again. So let's simply delete this. And then you will see that it's not listed here anymore in this drop-down list. Okay, so this is how you can delete configurations. And with that, now we've covered all the side notes. And with that, now we've covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to workspace-specific manual launch configurations. Okay, so now let's get to those user-specific settings. Namely, those settings apply globally, i.e. they apply to all workspaces. And let's first look at how to create them. Namely, therefore, we need to make use of the settings.json file. And we talk about that file when we talk about here the settings. And then in the side notes, here we talk about the settings.json file. So I will put a link to that video into the video description. Okay, so now let's see how we can create them. Therefore, let's go back to our other workspace here. And here, before we create those user-specific settings, let's delete the .vs Code folder. And then let's quickly run the debugger again. And here you can then see that it again says no configurations. Okay, so now let's create some user-specific launch configurations. So therefore, open the settings. And then here search for launch. And then you have this setting, and here you can add it in settings.json. So here you can then choose between inputs and version. So let's pick version. So this then creates this launch attribute here. And within that, there's this configurations attribute. And here you can add your configuration. So if I press enter and now invoke IntelliSense, then we can see the available configurations. So let's choose Node.js attach. And now you can see this configuration is now here available in this drop-down menu. However, since these are user-specific settings, this is available not just in this workspace, but in all workspaces. So if we go to our VS Code folder here, for example, if we go here to the debugger, it's also available here. Okay, so this is how you can create those user-specific launch configurations, and the way that you customize them is in the same way as with these workspace-specific configurations. So let's see that in action. So simply if I, for example, here change an attribute, so the name, I can then say this is my config, this then here depicted. If you want to add an attribute, you can simply add that. So invoke IntelliSense, then here, for example, let's pick restart. If you want to add another configuration, then simply add here a comma and then go to the next line and then invoke IntelliSense, and then here you can invoke your additional configuration. So let's choose this one. So now we have two configurations here available, and here just as a side note, one peculiarity is that if I invoke here IntelliSense, there's no configuration for Python available for whatever reason. However, you can manually create those. So if I add here the braces manually, and then here if I invoke IntelliSense in that, here I have actually available all those Python attributes. So for example, if I search for Django, this is available, or just my code is also available. So this way you could also then create a Python configuration. Okay, so this is how you can add a configuration, and then simply if you want to delete it again, simply delete it from this file. And then it's again deleted and it's not listed anymore. Okay, so this is how you can create and customize those user-specific launch configurations. Okay, so with that now we've covered all the points that I wanted to cover with respect to the two different types of launch configurations. So now let's get to this last side note here, which states that the status bar shows the current configuration, and you can click that to switch between configurations. So to show that, I've prepared another folder. So here I've created two configurations, and then here in the status bar, if you click this element, you can switch between those configurations. So if I click config 2 here, for example, then this starts the debugger with configuration 2. Okay, so let's stop this again. And that's already the side note. So with that now we've covered all the notes that I wanted to cover with respect to launch configurations. So we've reached the end of this video, and then in the next video we will go over the notes for the extensions. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.